many financial media have been interested and worried about the rate increase of the Japanese central bank. Actually, the Japanese central bank rose the overnight rate from 0% to 0.1%. So, should we be worried of that increase in the overnight rate or not? Well, the answer is very easy to understand. We shouldn't be. Why? Because from 0 to 0.1, in my opinion, it doesn't represent anything significant. But we should be very worried from the economical situation of Japan, because the economical situation of Japan could be, in perspective, what we could expect in the future in many Western nations or in many industrialized nations. Let's see why. Everything depends on the demographic. Many economists actually didn't take in consideration the demographic factor. They didn't put enough consideration on this factor. I will explain what is happening in Japan. If we look at the fertility rate of Japan, Japan since many decades has a fertility rate that is dramatically below the 2.1 children per woman. So if you have a fertility rate that is below the 2.1, through time, the demographic structure of your country will present dramatic changes. So the population will get older and older. When you get a population that is getting old, you have less people in the workforce and more retired people. This is the exact case of Japan. For example, look at the age pyramid of Japan during the 70s and the current pyramid, the age pyramid of Japan. You can see that right now there is a vast majority of the population that is or retired or it is close to retirement. So Japan is very assistantialistic with high level of government spending, require a lot of money that usually it is collected by taxes or by public debt. In the case of Japan, because Japan was affected, another characteristic of Japan was the fact that the high level of taxation, so the government started to use the central bank in order to sell the debt that it was producing in order to sustain the social expenditure. So little by little, the percentage of debt of Japan over the GDP skyrocketed up to more than 250%, which represent the country most in debt all around the world. So in the next graph, I compare the fertility rate, the GDP per capita, and the debt of the country. They are all anchored on base 100 in the year 1990. So let's see how was the evolution for Japan of these three indicators. The data have been collected from the Federal Reserve data and from World Bank. So, as you can see, you have the debt from the 90 to the 2021 skyrocketed from 100 up to more than 400 as an index number. All these indicators have been indexed starting, as I said, in 1990 on base 100, the three indicators. The fertility rate is in green. As you can see, the fertility rate is decreasing little by little, but is in a constant pace is decreasing. And the most important thing that it is quite below the 2.1 children per woman, per fertile woman. And then you have in the middle, you have the GDP per capita that is practically at the same level of the 90s. So, as you can see, Japan represents the typical case of a country that is getting older and at the same time that has the debt that is completely out of control. So, one of the questions that could be raised that we could raise is the fact that why a situation like the Japanese one, we don't see, for example, a skyrocket inflation. I will explain at the end of the video why there is not so much inflation in respect with other countries. For example, Argentina. Argentina was on the same pattern than Japan. The central bank was purchasing the government debt. But I will explain the difference between Japan and Argentina, in my opinion, and why Japan didn't register the same level of inflation that Argentina. Actually, the inflation level in Japan was almost close to zero. But at the same time, I would like to analyze also Switzerland. Why? Switzerland has a similar situation with the fertility rate, but is a very ordered country with low debt. So if we analyze Switzerland, we see a similar trend with the fertility rate, but at the same time, we have the GDP per capita that skyrocketed up to close to 250 index number, no? Because in the case of Switzerland, also I indexed on base 100 in the year 1990. But as you can see, in Switzerland, we had a rapid increase of the debt up to the year 2000, and then an important decrease of the debt that it is, we can say, compared with Japan, first is decreasing, and secondly is, let's say, under control. So we have two different situations. If a country is able to control its debt, is able to improve the economic indicator despite the aging of the population, is an extremely serious problem in the country that have the debt that is skyrocketing, which is the case not only of Japan, which is the case of many industrialized nations of the Western world. So I believe that instead of being worried of the rate increase of Japan from 0 to 0.1, which is nothing, in my opinion, we should be worried of the demographic. And usually economists don't take or don't put enough attention on the demographic factors and how they affect the economy. So last but not least, I would like to spend 2 words why, for example, in Japan, that the central bank is intervening directly in the economy, you have less inflation, for example, than in Argentina. Well, you have few factors to take in consideration. The first one is the cultural fact. Latin or American culture is very different from Japanese culture. Japanese people are more organized, so they probably have a better control of the money, of their money. So Japanese family, they don't spend all the money they get from their work, as, for example, happened throughout America, not only in Latin America, but the Latin culture and the North American culture are, regarding the spending habits, very similar, probably. So you have first a cultural factor. Then, if you compare, for example, Argentina with Japan, you have another important factor that it is related to the industrialization of the country. Japan was one of the first economy of the world, so it was highly industrialized. So it means a lot of dollars that were coming into Japan, a lot of strong currency that were coming, and you cannot compare the Japanese economy, obviously, with the one of Argentina. It is a much stronger economy, the Japanese one, in respect with the Argentinian one. And this is, without any doubt, another important factor. So these are, in my opinion, the 2 major factors that have controlled more the inflation in Japan. In comparison, actually in Japan it was close to 0, and it is a little bit a peculiar case because with all the money injection that occur in Japan, actually we would have expected an higher inflation. But because of the culture and because of the highly industrialized nation, probably you had inflation more under control. And then the last point that we have to take in consideration is the fact that the way inflation is computed, that it is referred only to the CPI, so only to consumer product, and it didn't take in consideration the investment goods. So probably if you would have a better index, including investment good, it would be a different situation in the case of Japan also. But anyway, it's another consideration, this one. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Please subscribe to the channel and share this video with your friend. Thank you.